The Mushroom Cup, being the first set of tracks of every game in the series, has arguably created some of the most iconic tracks. These are the courses we played for the very first time, whether that was on the original Super Mario Kart or even just as recent as Mario Kart 8. Recent is a bit of a stretch nowadays, but you get what I mean. So I've been inspired by a comment to see if I could create my ideal version of every cup, starting of course with the Mushroom Cup. So how this video is going to work is by ranking every track from worst to best, depending on what slot it would go into. First up will be the very first track of every game in the series. Now, the top track will ultimately be the only track I'll consider for the ideal cup selection, but I'll give points as shown. So I'm only really giving points to the top 3 tracks of each slot. This is so in the end we can see what games I consider to have the best Mushroom Cup tracks overall. If you want to skip straight to the video, click on this timestamp. Otherwise I have to go over a few rules I created for this video. First of all, Super Mario Kart is a bit of a pain in the ass. For this game there are 5 tracks per cup, so I decided to just allow the 4th and 5th track to count for the 4th slot of the Mushroom Cup. Now, to keep everything as consistent and organic as possible, I'm not playing or considering any remakes of each course, just the original version of the game, except for the 2D courses. You can call this bias all you want, but I'd much prefer the 3D remakes of these courses, because it's a lot easier to compare these tracks when I feel confident with the playstyle. Also, 90% of the time, the 2D tracks don't really live up to their 3D counterparts. So ultimately, the way I'm thinking about these selections is not what would make for a balanced and diverse track selection, but ultimately what is just my favourite courses for each slot. And that's why I feel like it's a good reason to keep score of what games I prefer. So with that all out of the way, let's see the options for slot 1. The worst beginner track of all time goes to DS's Figure 8 Circuit. This is such a nothing track. There's some simple tracks across the series, but this one really takes the cake, because there's genuinely nothing going on here. Other simple tracks will put in like one shortcut and call it a day, but this is just miserable. Luigi Raceway is basically an updated version of Figure 8 Circuit. It has some off-road, some ramps, and an item box that you can sometimes get, but those features don't really spice up the core experience. You're still just driving around a giant Figure 8. Surprisingly, the first track of the series has more going on in it than a DS track. Really, all this track had to do was teach players the essential controls and skills required, and I think it does a good job of that. Simple things like allowing space for shortcuts and placing pipes to dodge make this track just a bit better than the basic Figure 8 layouts. Peach Circuit is just as forgettable as all these other beginner tracks, but at least I can say the layout is trying new things. Instead of being a basic loop, it has a lot more bends and turns, and having off-road all around the course allows you to pull off some shortcuts every now and again. But even the 3D remake of this course doesn't really save it from mediocrity. I know for a fact this is one of the most beloved beginner tracks in the series, and I gotta attribute that to how the items in Double Dash make the core Mario Kart experience feel so different. Personally, I don't think the items coupled with this track's gimmick save it from its mediocre layout, but this is still a decently fun time, especially when you add in all the little shortcuts at the end and the chain jump that sometimes obstructs you. Surprisingly, one of the most dunked on courses makes it to 3rd place. And I wouldn't say this is me necessarily praising this course, but for a beginner track, it's actually really solid. The start is kinda slow with some drawn out straightaways and big turns, but the layout at the end gets way more complicated. It has 2 shortcuts, the first being a simple ramp shortcut, but I absolutely love the pipe shortcut. This is a shortcut that's always pretty difficult, but also very satisfying. When you cut the corner completely, it's just so rewarding. This is all pretty basic stuff, but next to its competition, this is a very competent introductory track. Luigi Circuit is marginally better than Toad Circuit. In a way, it's almost identically designed like Toad Circuit. It starts off pretty slow, has one shortcut with a ramp, then a big turn at the end with another shortcut through a maze of pipes. I like this track for all the same reasons as Toad's Circuit, but this one just feels a bit more condensed. Being able to wheelie also contributes to that feeling, but really I feel like these last two courses are pretty interchangeable. Without a doubt, this is the best first track of any game in the series. Really no section in this track feels like a waste of space. There's constant twists and turns, different paths to get you experimenting, and a diverse selection of shortcuts. Of course, the Maze of Pipes makes its return, and recently I've discovered that you can completely skip this whole section. Really what makes this track so good to come back to is how there are always different ways to get better. For all skill levels, this track is a fantastic time. So slot 1 goes to Mario Kart 8 with really no competition at all. Now here's the options for slot 2. To no one's surprise at all, last place goes to the SNES track. This is a step up from Mario Circuit 1, but there's nothing much going on here. I like the shortcut through the grass, and some of these turns are pretty challenging, but still it's very mid. Shy Guy Beach is also quite forgettable. It's really just a basic loop made up of a bunch of islands. Driving in the water feels so slippery and not satisfying at all, and the cannonballs never really have an impact on the track, so this one ends up feeling lackluster even with the 3D remake. This is another track I don't really have much to say about. This is just another loop with no flexibility to it. Sometimes going through the waterfall to get items spices things up, but I'll still always see this as a drawn out, uninteresting race. Moo Moo Farms is where things get a bit more interesting. I still think this is a pretty bad track overall, because it's very boring and simplistic for most of the race. But I love the idea of putting Monty Moles on the inside of the track. It creates a risk and reward factor to this track that makes it stick out just a bit. Water Park is by far one of the least interesting tracks in Mario Kart 8. Granted, the rest of the track selection is pretty phenomenal, so this track still gets 4th place. But I also really struggle to think of things to say about this one. The water gimmick of this course is pretty useless in that nothing cool is done with this course. You kinda just drop into some water and drive how you normally would've. The shortcut at the end and the Ferris wheel are the only notable parts of this track, but they're not anything to write home about. Peach Beach is a big step up in quality. This course offers a lot of obstacles to avoid in the beach section. I despise the Cataquacks, but they do work as a very threatening enemy, and judging what path to take based on how high the tide is gets you actively thinking in this track. But in all honesty, I don't really love most of this track. I still think the beach section is a bit too open, and half the track is just driving in a straight line. Now this is a fantastic sequel for the Moo Moo fans. Moo Moo Meadows really gives life to the barren track theme that Moo Moo Farm introduced. The cows interacting with the course creates one of the best obstacles. You have plenty of time to react to the cows due to how slow they're going, but I still find it difficult to effectively weave between them sometimes. This is also a track that has a lot of great opportunities for shortcuts, usually to skip obstacles that are otherwise pretty hard to navigate. Overall, this is still a simple course, but there's way more challenge injected into this course than what other Mushroom Cup tracks often display. Daisy Hills is a course I really adore. I think the theming for this is beautiful, as even though it's your typical grass course, it has a more distinct design to the buildings and course as a whole. I'm not sure what country it's based on, but it gives me a Scandinavia vibe. Aside from the visual design, this course has a fantastic gliding section. Gliding between the hot air balloons and windmills makes great use of the glider, whereas most tracks typically underutilize their glider sections. Also, having a really well hidden shortcut makes this section all the better. Even though there aren't that many difficult obstacles, I find this course really charming, and the different shortcuts really spice it up for only the second track in the game. This time, it was a lot closer between the top two, but ultimately Mario Kart 7 just wins out. Now here's the options for slot 3. Everyone knows by this point, this is either a course you love or hate. I personally think this is close to being one of the worst tracks in this series, but it all really depends on whether you think the chaos of items is a fun gimmick or a bullshit one. Ghost Valley 1 is the first course that started kicking my ass, and it is a good escalation of challenge, as it's kind of an in-between of the safe tracks and the tracks with no rails. I feel like this one isn't really that challenging if you're good with the controls, and aside for the feather shortcut, there's nothing notable here. Sweet Sweet Canyon is a track I've always kinda hated. Don't get me wrong, it is a huge step up from the last track, but I am never excited to see this track. It's kinda hard to dissect why I don't like it, cause all throughout the track it's got stuff going on, but I'm not a fan of the giant turn around the cake, and the split path feels kinda lame here. Like, it's the exact same path with not much happening on either side. The only saving grace here is the donut shortcut. Cheep Cheep Lagoon does a really good job of introducing the water mechanic. Tricking off the seaweed and jumping into the water give you a feel for how floaty the game's controls become. And getting to this shortcut is one of my favourite things to do. There's a lot of different paths to take, some with more risk than others, which still makes this fun to come back to. The only thing holding it back is that a lot of the track feels incomplete, when I wish they fleshed it out a bit more. Cheep Cheep Beach is one of the most inviting destinations Mario Kart has explored. I love driving across the sand at this point, avoiding the crabs is great, and I kinda forgot that it's pretty interesting to judge when to cross the water to save time. I still prefer the Mario Kart 8 version, but overall this is always a fun race. So this is the first 2D track to make the top 3, but only because I'm using the 3D version. This is kind of what I mean by leveling the playing field, as the 2D version of this track is alright, but giving some verticality and depth allows you to fully understand the vision here. Sure, it's a short and simple track, but you're pretty much always drifting here. There's some great shortcuts because of how open the track feels now, and the idea of having items scattered all over the course is refreshing. I wish it wasn't just bananas and mushrooms, but I can't lie, it introduces a cool mechanic that you should constantly be looking out for. The simplicity holds it back from greatness though. This is another really great beach track. Although it's just a big loop, I feel like the rocky cliff's weird formation makes for a unique track design. Each section of this track gives you something to deal with, so you never get too bored. And of course, there's the waterfall shortcut. I love pulling this off as it's still difficult to this day, but this is one of those shortcuts that feels so satisfying to get right. Aside for the shortcut, there's nothing too memorable about this course, but it's just a consistently fun track. A lot of the tracks so far have been pretty good, and a lot of them I would say are good for being Mushroom Cup tracks. That is, simple but effective. Mushroom Gorge is genuinely one of the best tracks in the entire series. Like, Mario Kart Wii does not hold back from making challenging courses early on, and I gotta respect it for that, because playing this track efficiently is still hard to this day. The physics in Mario Kart Wii when bouncing off mushrooms is all over the place, but eventually getting the hang of it leads to some interesting gameplay that no other course really goes for. Additionally, the shortcuts in this track go hard. This one's pretty difficult to find, and jumping across is so risky. Then there's the infamous gap jump. I love going for this shortcut as it's a fair challenge that I still haven't completed, but the satisfaction when I do will be immense. These courses are a huge improvement on the previous slot, but in the end, nothing was going to come close to the magnificence of Mushroom Gorge. So here's the options for the fourth and final slot. Bowser Castle 1 from SNES is actually one of 4 Bowser Castles that appear in that game. That is because pretty much every theme I've mentioned so far will have repeats. And usually the first course of each theme is the most bare bones version of it. This is no exception. The only notable thing here are the random corners in this section. And if that's the most notable thing, you know you have a forgettable track. Bowser Castle 1 from the GBA is just as forgettable as the last track. Granted, the Mario Kart 7 track feels a bit more entertaining, but there's no challenge to this whatsoever. Mario Circuit 2 is much better than the last two tracks, but only in the Mario Kart 7 version. I mean, the layout is pretty basic overall, but the addition of a glider ramp at the end made this a more memorable track than I thought it could be. Calamari Desert is honestly a really brutal course, but it is a great fit for Mario Kart 64 because that game loves to kick you when you're down. I really love the train gimmick as it can switch up the momentum of a race just like that, and the feeling of just squeezing through when all the other races have to wait is one of the best feelings. Aside for its main gimmick, I wouldn't say this course is too complex, as there's a lot of open space with nothing interesting sprinkled in. Although I've never played any of the original games, Luigi's Mansion is such a great surprise. I know like none of the references, but the course still does a great job of staying entertaining. It feels so good sliding around the mud pit, narrowly avoiding the trees, moving between each island to keep your grip. But I feel like the actual mansion is the most disappointing part of the track. Like, nothing really happens in here, and there's no life to any parts. This is still a good track, but I feel like the Mario Kart 7 version is much better. This version just has too many barren areas to be any higher. Shy Guy Bazaar is a good exploration of a theme we never get to see. The marketplace offers you so many different paths, and it's pretty fun to experiment with all of them. There's also a cool hidden shortcut that really appeals to me. It's not much of a shortcut, but I really enjoyed discovering this for the first time. The rest of the track is a bit forgettable, and the glider section feels like missed potential, but overall, this is still a really good track. So, Double Dash is the Mario Kart I'm least familiar with, and as you can tell from the footage, I'm not the best at it. But I was not expecting this course to be so much more difficult than its Mario Kart 8 counterpart. Things like making the sandpit more aggressive, or having the pokies bend around the items, or this giant tornado destroying me. I really appreciate the difficulty here, because some of the best tracks in the series are the ones that actually challenge you. And this course has a lot of replayability because of this. I thought I was gonna hate this course because of Mario Kart 8, but I was pleasantly surprised. Still, it's a desert track, so it automatically loses points. In my opinion, Thwomp Ruins is not just one of the best Mushroom Cup tracks, but is also one of my favourite tracks from Mario Kart 8. This is a track that always feels busy. The moving boulders and multiple path splits in this section make it feel diverse every time. I love trying to get onto the glider ramp. It feels kind of like a reverse Indiana Jones. I also feel like this is a good implementation of anti-gravity. You can avoid a lot of the hazards by going up on the walls, or you can take the faster paths if you're more confident. This course is also filled with great shortcuts. This one here is consistently difficult, but acts as a great risk at the end of the track. I truly have nothing bad to say about this course, and it only just misses out on the top spot because the next course is just too freaking good. Toad's Factory can be an overwhelming course at times, because there are so many things to keep track of here. All the moving platforms and obstacles contribute to this hectic feeling where you're never really given any downtime. And the progression of difficulty here is perfect. It starts off with moving conveyor belts that you don't have to interact with, but it incentivizes you to learn how these conveyors work as you're initially attracted to the item boxes. Then you're given the first obstacle you actually have to interact with. Passing all the boxes is pretty difficult, but you can just drive forward and hope. But then you're forced to actually pay attention to the moving conveyors on the ground, because if you go on the wrong one, you will be significantly slowed down. The finale of this track is just one of the best obstacles in any Mario Kart track, as you have to quickly analyze which path to take to hit all the boost pads here. It's crazy how full this track feels, and they do not hold back on making this difficult. I seriously question why this is considered a Mushroom Cup track, because it feels more suited to the Star Cup, but thankfully it makes for the best possible finale to the Mushroom Cup. So Mario Kart Wii has the best overall selection of Mushroom Cup tracks, to no one's surprise. But honestly, what's most surprising is that DS's Mushroom Cup only got 1 point. This is the first Mario Kart game I ever played, and I do remember it pretty fondly. And it took me forever to discover you could unlock more tracks, so I played the first 2 cups over and over again. Yeah, I had so much experience with those cups, but overall I feel like Mushroom Cup for DS is just a bit too disappointing. And I feel like it deserves last place just for having Figure 8 Circuit in it. Anyways, thanks so much if you made it this far, and I would love to know in the comments what you think the best Mushroom Cup selections would have been. But anyways, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.